Hello and welcome to this very special bonus episode of The Shift, the podcast that aims to tell the no-holds-barred truth about being a woman post-40, created and hosted by me, writer and broadcaster Sam Baker. I'm delighted to welcome a very special guest, the award-winning author of 10 best-selling novels, Barbara Kingsolver. Now, every so often a book comes along that you want to press into the hands of everybody you meet. For me, Demon Copperhead is one of those books. It's a reimagining of the Dickens classic David Copperfield, translated to the Appalachian mountains in the midst of the opioid crisis. It's funny, it's furious, and its hero, Demon, is a character you will never, ever forget. I'm not the only one who thinks so. Earlier this year, Barbara was awarded a Pulitzer Prize, and it's also shortlisted for the Women's Prize for Fiction. She's been shortlisted for that 3 times before, and won for her novel The Lacuna. But she may have won it again by the time you hear this. Who knows?
So it feels really wonderful to get to be this age, this place, doing what I love so much, and connecting with people in a way that 11-year-old Barbara never imagined in her wildest dreams.
Earlier this month, while she was on tour, Barbara foolishly let me into her Edinburgh hotel room to tell me how growing up weird, bookish and poor shaped her, and how she discovered she was a so-called hillbilly. We also discussed being an introvert in an extrovert world, finding love second time around, not winning the jackpot in the mothering department, and why life gets better with every decade that passes. As an aside, if you're a packing nerd, Barbara shares her killer packing tips. And I've got to say, if you ever wanted to do a 3-week holiday with just a carry-on, Barbara is your woman. You were brilliant. There was so much love in the room. It's a long time since I've been to a book event except at the festival, and there's been a queue up the road waiting to come in. You must have got used to that over the last week, but how does that feel?
One doesn't get used to it. I mean, it's funny because my life is divided into such very different parts. My work life, for 98% of my working life, I'm alone, completely alone in a room with my thoughts, with the people, and the stories inside my head. And I like solitude, obviously.
Yeah, just as well.
Yeah, I mean, I think most novelists are introverted because that's where we live. That's our place. And so then for the other 2% of your working life to be thrust out into the world and meeting so many people and seeing my work has really become a part of their lives and, in a really, often a really important way. And they want to let me know that. It's a shock. It's a real shock to the system. And hard in some ways to meet that expectation, to absorb all of that emotion and gratitude and also like pain. People are telling me your book was medicine for some great ache in my life. Just to be present to all that is very hard work, and it's a completely different kind of work than what I usually do. And when it's all done, I feel so thankful that I got to do it, because it reminds me that, now I'm going back into that quiet place, but I'm not really alone in that room. This is a huge conversation I'm having. And it's a good thing for me to take that back into the room. Both the love, sort of the rewarding sense of it, that yes, I am doing this for good reason, and also the responsibility of it, that people do need what I'm doing. It's good to feel valued, isn't it?
After that intense period with all those people kind of like wanting a piece of you a bit, do you get introvert burnout?
Every day, because that's what it means to be an introvert, is not that you dislike people at all. It's that being with people requires energy. It's draining. It takes energy from you, and it is physical and psychic work to be with people, no matter who they are, even my own family. If I'm at a family reunion, there comes a point where I have to go find a quiet place and put a pillow over my head. So that's book tour. I go out and I meet my public, and then I really do have to go back to a hotel room and put those pillows over my head. I just need to cocoon because it is such intense exposure, and I have to recover every day in order to be ready to go and do it again. Sometimes I have to cocoon twice a day.
No, I get that totally. I think it took me a long time to understand that if you're an introvert, being around people, like you say, even people you love, it takes it out of you. Whereas if you're an extrovert, being around people puts it in.
Exactly. It's as simple as that. And it's hard to explain it without sounding mean. But it's just how we're made. It's how we're born, and it cannot change. I was that shy kid growing up who always sat at the back of the classroom and never spoke, and always felt like that was wrong of me. I was the wrong kind of person, because that's how people talk. They say, Barbara needs to bring herself out of her shell. Barbara needs to, it's like a failure to be shy, to be that person who just would rather watch than participate. There's a wonderful book called Quiet by Susan Cain.
Yes,
Do you know
it's
it?
brilliant, isn't it?
My older daughter, Camille, we're all introverts, and it's inherited. It's genetic. You are born this way. If you have introverted parents, you will be an introvert.
Is Stephen an introvert? Because I just bumped into Stephen leaving your hotel room, and he seemed
He's an extrovert.
Yeah, very
very much. And it's such a good marriage because, if I were married to someone like me, we would never go out.
Yes.
He gets me out, and I say, no, and then I'm glad I did. It's a really good balance in our relationship. But back to that book, my daughter Camille read it, and then she handed it to me and said, Mom, read this. It's about us, and it will help you forgive yourself. That was like the simplest way to put it. And she was so right. It was so helpful to understand this isn't something I'm doing. This is who I am. And your whole life long, it's not going to change. And American culture, especially, I think, is very anti-introvert. The business model is get everybody in a room and brainstorm, and even businesses
hustle.
are set hustle. Businesses are set up that way, and problem solving think tanks are set up that way. And we quiet people have a whole different way of working. Well, I've worked it out. I have a job where I get to sit and that's my way of problem solving, is to write a novel. But another thing that I learned from that book is that introversion, as we were saying, that it really just has to do with whether you gain energy from being around people or you lose energy. You have to give energy to the project of being with people. That will never change, but shyness can be changed. And I used to be shy, and now obviously I'm not. Being unshy is something you can learn, like playing the piano or playing tennis. You learn it with practice. And I've had a lot of practice at speaking to large halls and really opening myself to people, being in a weird way fairly intimate with large groups of people, because I've practiced it. I've learned how to do it. And so people see that and they say, oh, no, you can't. You're not introverted. But that's different. You can be an introverted public speaker. The difference is what you do afterwards.
Yeah.
The bed, the pillows over the head.
Yeah, that's I totally get that, totally. I mean, you were talking about when you were a little girl, at school and like not speaking up enough. I'd like to talk about your childhood, because your childhood is so integral to Demon Copperhead, isn't it? It's so
there's more
your Appalachian-ness.
There's more of me in Demon than most people would probably imagine. I could write that character because I have been bullied. I was a kid in school who didn't fit in, didn't have the right clothes. It was a peculiar situation. We only wore hand-me-downs. The town kids it's a tiny town, 1,500 people in my town. But even at that, there was a class distinction between the town kids whose parents, owned the grocery store or the drugstore or whatever, and the rural kids who rode the bus and got to school with mud on our shoes. It was just a very clear class distinction, and there was no dating across that line. Really, seriously. Really? It was rare even for there to be friendships across those lines. So I was one of the country kids, and I was shy, and I was weird. I was bookish. I liked studying and learning stuff in a culture that really didn't value that, especially for boys, but even for girls. Being the teacher's pet, being the smart one, did not make you popular. I didn't fit in, so I did get bullied quite a lot. And
was that other girls?
Girls, the meanest.
Yeah.
Sheesh. Starting in 5th, 6th grade, just they made sure I knew what a mess I was. Yeah.
Because I was that kid at school too. No friends, standing on the edge of the playground, How old's 5th or 6th grade?
You're
11.
11, 12. Yeah, that's when it really starts to happen. Just puberty is when girls start getting really socially adept at, letting each other know who's in and who's out. It's a primate thing. I mean, monkeys do it too.
Yeah,
It's part of our development. That's especially for females to just really learn a lot about social capital and kind of forming your alliances to give you power and advantage. Yeah. I didn't understand that at that time, but now I do.
That's the trouble,
As a biologist, I can see what was going on.
Yeah, that doesn't help when you're 11, does
it?
No. What was your puberty experience like?
Scary because I had a mother who didn't tell me anything at all. She just wouldn't talk about stuff like that. So I went to my brother for information. He was 2 years older, and bless his heart, I mean, he did his best, but he didn't know anything either. He was
God love him.
I'm still very close to my brother. My brother has been my lifelong best friend. And we survived together. We negotiated it. We lived out in the country. We didn't have playmates, we were a mile from any other family with kids our age. So we were each other's companion in playing in the woods, collecting pets. We would catch animals and figure out how to keep them in the house and read. We would just take on projects together. We just used the materials at hand. We had an Encyclopedia Britannica. That whole shelf of books was in the house. Who knows where it came from?
It's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah.
At that kind of time, so many people had those.
Yeah.
Bought them on the doorstep or maybe picked them up. Where did they come from?
Yeah, but who knows? But that was all of knowledge in one place. So we made a deal where we would read them all. I started at A and he started at Z, and we worked towards the middle. And we figured by the time we got to M and N, between us, we would know everything.
Yeah.
So that's the kind of stuff we did. We tried reading the Bible together. We were not a particularly churchy family, but it was a churchy culture and place, and we didn't really know much about the Bible, so we thought, we should read this.
Yeah.
And so we read it aloud to each other, and for little kids, I was probably 9 and he was 11. It's horrifying. It's people, men sleeping with their daughters or using them as, we figured this out, using them as bargaining tools and, a lot of slaying with jawbones of asses. It was horrifying. We thought, we're not getting the point of this. I think we're going to...
Maybe you were.
Maybe we were. Well, Old Testament is pretty fierce, and naturally that's where you're going to start. But we were also already little scientists. So, this whole thing of the whole world created in 7 days, that's baloney. We just didn't buy it. So... Yeah, that was our attempt to become churched, and it failed badly.
So you were a little scientist, but you were also really good at music, weren't you?
Uh-huh.
And now you are a global best-selling writer. So how did the little scientist make that journey?
Well,
How long you got, I suppose?
yeah. I still feel like I'm the same me I've always been. I'm just a lot less shy, but I'm interested in the same things. I just was always interested in everything. I suppose wanting to read the entire Encyclopedia Britannica at age 11 pretty much sums it up. Music was just because of culture. I come from a place where people make music, a place and time. It's not so true now. And that's sad. I think kids grow up now because they have such easy access to music that even, country kids get their music from their phones and they feel like you have to be a professional to do it. But Appalachian culture, it's a culture of makers. It's a really resourceful culture. So, women make quilts and they make food and they make clothes and people make their own music. And it was really common, for people to get together and play music. That was something that happened in my childhood. And I just played an instrument. We had a band at school and I played the clarinet and I played the piano. We had a piano at home and I begged to learn from a really early age. I just wanted to own that piano, own it, like with my hands. And so, I started taking piano lessons from Miss Edith, the lady in the town, the elderly lady in the town who taught me everything wrong. And, but at least I learned to read music and the basics. And then somehow there was a substitute. The deficits in the school system were vast. We just really had so few resources in the school. But there were several times when some substitute would come in from the city for a week and they would always find me. One of them was math. She said, "Wow, you're in 7th grade and I think you're really smart, but your math is like 3rd grade level. Can I help here?" And of course I was really embarrassed. And I said, "Well, sure." I wasn't different from anyone in the class, but somehow she picked me out and she gave me these texts and she gave me a little bit of special help and bam, I figured out algebra. And a similar thing happened with music. It was this music teacher who, I don't know how, just singled me out and said, "Come upstairs." Up in the attic of this old creaky school, there was a piano. And she said, "Play some things for me." And then she said, I'll never forget this. She said, "You are almost ruined beyond repair, but I think I can fix you. I can save you." And
oh, wow.
And I felt so shamed, but also so excited. I was like, okay, save me.
Somebody's coming to fix me.
I mean, technically, I was doing everything wrong. That was 7th grade. And so she started coming for a period of time that she had, giving me lessons. And I got so much better and I got so much intense pleasure from this that she persuaded my mom. I mean, this was a great kindness from my mom, who usually didn't have time for very much. But she drove me to Lexington, a city an hour away, to a good teacher. And, that was what got me through high school. As a lonely misfit kid, I just threw myself into piano. And I met other people. My first boyfriend was also a piano player. I would be in these groups of kids who were accomplished at something, who didn't have to hide their intelligence or their passion or their skills. And that did save me. So I got to college on a music scholarship, but really I just wanted to get to college and I wanted to take classes in everything. I was that kid who wants to major in everything. Anthropology. Wow. I could go on with that forever. Or, evolutionary biology. Yes. I loved my literature classes. Maybe I got to take 2. But pretty early on, I switched over from music, which was not going to be a practical major, to the practical major of biology, because I figured to have a job when this is all done.
And it's not going to be concert pianist.
It absolutely is not. No, I knew that. And I through all this, I loved reading and writing so much, but that's just, the writing was very private. I just wrote poems and stories that I didn't show to anybody. But that compulsion to just keep learning new things and follow every new thing down the long alley to enlightenment, that's being a novelist. I finally found the perfect job for me.
Yeah. No, totally. It's that moment, isn't it, when as a lonely kid, a kid who has to pretend not to be clever, when you don't have to pretend anymore, when you meet other people and you don't have to be quiet at the back of the class, because it's like you'll be told off by the teacher if you're quiet at the back of the class, but you'll be told off by the other kids if you say you know the answer.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that pretty much sums up my entire school experience. It was miserable, actually. I was, now looking back, I was a very unhappy kid and, probably depressed. But, nobody had time to notice stuff like that. But the remedy for me was reading. I just would disappear into books because that gave me access to other lives.
When you got to college in Indiana on a scholarship, did you feel like I've arrived, I found my people, or did you meet a whole new type of adversity?
Yes and yes. Initially, I was thinking my people are out there. I was thinking, college. That's why I worked so hard to get to go to college, because almost nobody did. And I was really on my own. Now, and even then probably in other schools, there were counselors who would help you sign up for the tests. I had to figure all that out for myself and drive myself to take the SATs and stuff. But I really, really wanted to go, thinking I would find my tribe. So it was so disappointing that once I got there, I was being ridiculed again, this time for being a hillbilly. And that, I never thought about being a hillbilly or, a Kentuckian until I went to college, and everybody laughed at the way I said certain words, all words. And my friends gave me this thing. It was like a Hoosier passport that allowed a limited number of Kentuckians to cross the river into Indiana. And I laughed. But that's so mean. But they didn't think it was mean because
so rude.
Yeah, right? But it was so standard to laugh at hillbillies that I just thought, okay, I really am a joke. I just kind of accepted it and tried to pass. I tried to, I started changing my diction and started trying to be a more cosmopolitan person. Whatever I thought that was.
Yeah,
whatever the heck that meant, which, meant something I imagined from books I'd read. And I was academically completely lost because, I'd had such poor schooling. I didn't have, I was a good writer because I had read so many books. I knew how to do that, but I didn't know the proper way to do footnotes in a term paper and all that. So I had to be that same kid who read the encyclopedia. I've always been an autodidact, and I just kicked into high gear and spent a lot of time in the library quietly catching up. And the main thing I learned in college was how to teach myself whatever it is I'm missing. And that too is the skill of a novelist. And I think the good thing about that, of always having been self-taught, most things that I know I taught myself, is that I have probably a ludicrous amount of confidence when I go into a subject. I just think, I don't know anything about, I'm going to create, a character who teaches political science. I don't know anything about that, but I can learn all about, when you write a novel, you have to know everything that your characters know. You can't just write, and then he said something very clever about economics. You have to know what he said, and it has to be right, because somebody reading you will know if you're wrong, and they will tell you. So, yeah.
They so will, yeah.
Yeah, they so will. So, when I step back and look at it, I think that's so audacious that I think that I can just learn everything I need to know to create these novels about real things in the world with people who know a lot of real things, but I just know I can do it. And I did in time. For the happy ending, I found good friends in college. I found the kind of friends who you stay up with all night talking about Toynbee or politics or history or Chaucer or whatever. I found those good friends, and I felt for the first time like someone who belonged to a group.
Well, you went to college and then you did that kind of young person thing, didn't you, of traveling and ended up in Tucson. What was it that made you go back to Appalachia, where you had not been that happy as a child?
Right. Yeah, I thought, I'm getting out of here. And then once I did, I thought, oh, nobody thinks that's a good place to be. And, I loved my adventures. I still do. I love to travel. I love to see the world. I loved, moving around Europe, owning nothing more than what would fit in my backpack and doing these, hand-to-mouth jobs just to learn language. I love languages. I loved learning French. I learned Greek. I learned Spanish. So I love those experiences. And then I had to come back to the States at some point because I was living in France and it was getting very difficult. That was in the late end of the 70s. It was getting hard to keep a work permit. Things were starting to change as far as that. So I had to come back to the States, and I chose Tucson just on a whim. I thought, I'll try out the West. That sounds interesting. And then I kind of got stuck there because I was at that age where life happens to you. You get a job, and then you get a boyfriend who turns into, your partner, and then you get a house, and then you get kids. And so I had this life in Tucson. There was, a very good life. I loved the people I met. I was learning. I became a politicized person there, living close to the border of Mexico. I just learned a whole new way of understanding the world and what, one nation will do to another. So it was a really good time for sort of growing up, but it never felt like home. I missed the landscape of my childhood. I just ached for trees, for green trees and grass and mossy creeks and ferns, just that landscape. And see, in childhood, all my happy time was spent in the woods and in the fields, playing with my brother. That was the joy of childhood. And I think we imprint on the landscapes of our childhood in such a way that nothing else ever looks quite right. And honestly, Tucson, the desert, as interesting and dramatic as it is, felt to me like a place that didn't want me living there. There's not enough water. There are not enough resources there. You cannot grow enough food in the desert to support the city of Tucson. It increasingly felt immoral for me to stay there. And I knew I had to get back to Appalachia. Whenever I did, there was something in me that just, as soon as I would see those mountains and those forests, something in me just let out its breath. And I never felt at home until I was back there. I couldn't go back to the little town where I was so unhappy, and I would not raise my children there. But just by coincidence, I don't know, some strange twist of fate, I got this Lila Wallace Fellowship, and they sent me to a little college in Appalachia, Emory and Henry College, where I was meant to spend 2 weeks as a visiting writer. I talked to all different classes, and one of them was a class taught by Professor Stephen Hopp. And we just fell for each other in a completely platonic way, I guess, because, we had a very short amount of time. I didn't know if he was married. He didn't know, we didn't know anything about each other's personal lives, but we just loved talking about, we had so many interests in common: music, nature, biology, everything. And so we just started this conversation that didn't end. And I went back to Tucson and we talked on the phone. Well, we did figure out that neither of us was married. And we talked on the phone every night for a year and then had to get married. But he lived on this beautiful farm in Emory, Virginia, which is geographically, it's in every way the beauty of Appalachia, but it's a little town that has a college, so it's different from the town where I grew up. There's enough diversity. My kids went to school with kids of professors who had moved there from, Atlanta or from, England, or just the presence of the college changed the culture of the school. There were enough kids there who valued education that my kids wouldn't get bullied if they wanted to go to college. So it was just the perfect place. So yeah, when I moved to Stevens Farm, I knew I'd found heaven. I don't want to live anywhere else ever again.
Is that where you still live?
Yeah, that's where we live. Yeah, and honestly, he saw how hard I was working. I was giving a lecture every hour. He said, if you have a couple hours free this afternoon, I live on a farm, you can come out just for some farm therapy. And that was astute. And I did. And I mean, the house at that time, it was what he could afford on a teacher's salary. So it was nothing extravagant. It was a very rundown old 100-year-old farmhouse, but the place is beautiful. It's this wooded hollow and it has a creek running down it, and it's just, full of birdsong and full of life. And really, I fell in love with the farm. So the Jane Austen version of the story would be that I married him for his farm. But it was both.
You got the farm too.
Yeah. But, it was complicated to work out. We didn't immediately move there because I had ties in Tucson that I couldn't leave. So for a number of years, it was hard because we thought we'd have to sell the farm. And I just said that we're not going to sell the farm. Whatever we have to do, we will do to keep it. So we rented it to a family so that we could cover the mortgage. And then for some time, we lived in Tucson part of the year, and then there in the summers in the little tiny cabin up in the woods behind the farmhouse. We worked it out so that we could get back there. And now that's...
Could you imagine ever living in a city?
I have lived in cities, and this is the kind of city dweller I am. I have a pot of tomatoes growing on my balcony. And honestly, in Tucson, I lived in the city, right downtown for a long time, but I had to have a garden in my little postage stamp backyard. And I love to visit cities, but I visit them, it's like my Apache raid. I'll go in and I'll go to the museums and I'll go to the concerts, and then I come home again. It was really interesting in Demon Copperhead to write about a city from the point of view of somebody who feels really horrified and oppressed by cities. Because I think, I think people who are born and raised in cities think that we country folk are just so missing out. And they think we all want to be in cities. And I can't tell you how many people have asked me, how can you live out there in the middle of nowhere without the faintest clue that is such a demeaning thing to say?
It's somewhere to you.
It's everything to me. It's everywhere to me. And plus, I grow food and I have water. Yeah. and neighbors whose names I know. But really to go inside of Little Demon's head and show people how this looks to us, to those of us who are accustomed to, first of all, looking in the eye of every person we meet, how that feels to be among people who just don't look at you, how strange that is, to be in an apartment that feels like, as he calls it, the Doom Castle. Do you know the Duke Nukem? It's a video game.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah, where you're just in this maze and every door opens to another maze and it's horrifying because you can't get out. And he says, there was no outside anywhere because I looked. Because outside to him is trees and pastures with cattle. And it just felt so fake to him and scary that there was nothing but people and stuff made by people. And sorry, but that's how it feels to me too. And I'm old enough to not to panic because I know how I can get out.
Yeah.
But it's so rare to see rural life at all in books, in film. I can tell you the last movie I saw about rural people, about farmers and, genuine farm life, not fake farm life, was called Minari. It was
yes.
And I think
Korean.
and I think that only got made because it was about Korean immigrants. And so that was sort of like, oh, Korean immigrants, that's interesting. But we don't see farm life or rural life represented in any thoughtful, compassionate, or even interested way. And so I don't blame people for thinking we don't exist, that our existences are nil. So that's, that's a big part of what I have to do.
Yes. How does that feel to know that not only do a lot of people not know that, this huge swathe of the country where you live not only doesn't exist, but is looked down on?
It's really bad. It's been bad for my whole life. And it's interesting that nearly half of the population of the US does not live in cities. So it's half of the population and 2% at most of what we see in film and TV and books and newspapers. And we're all so used to that. We just accept it. But there's an immense amount of resentment and anger from rural people about how dismissed we are, about the sort of cultural condescension towards us. And I mean, it's been going on my whole life, this antipathy between rural and urban people. But it's gotten so much worse in the last decade or 15 years, I guess, because, rural people have just gotten so fed up with a government that dismisses and ignores them. And, the economies of small towns are just like beyond despair. Opportunities are so limited. The only money going into farming is going to the giant industrial farms, not to people, not to family farms. And so people are so fed up with a government that does nothing for them. They vote for the guy who says, I'm on your side, I'm going to blow it all up. And I understand that. I didn't vote for him, but I understand why my neighbors did. They feel like he hears them. So because of that, everything has gotten worse because now the urban people who already looked down on the country people now feel like they can do it with impunity because they voted for this really horrible guy.
Yeah, in a way, he legitimized what they'd been doing already.
Exactly. Yeah, he legitimized their hatred or their contempt. Contempt is the right word. And, people will ask me when I traveled around in the U.S., because I only, of course, on my book tours, only went to cities. And people ask, well, what about the MAGA thing? They say with their, and I have to say, let me tell you about the MAGA thing. Let me tell you how it feels to be spoken of with that face you just made. We're mad. We're mad, and we express it in different ways, and that was not a good one because he didn't do a thing. He didn't do a thing for rural people.
He only cares about himself, doesn't he?
Yeah. And he doesn't represent our values. And there's also this thing of, probably much like here, the people who voted for Brexit, even though it caused a lot of things to fall down around your ears, you don't want to say, oh, I messed up. So you'd rather say, oh, it's the French people who made it. It's really hard to own a mistake on that level. But some people are owning the mistake of Trump. He's not going to get elected again.
Oh, fingers crossed.
I know. I was going to say, knock
clutching wood.
Knock wood.
Do you feel like as you have got older, you've got braver and more outspoken and more, able to stand up in a book event and go, that face you just made?
Yeah, what I said last night is true. I hate to disappoint people. That's just in me. I am a person who, I can disappoint people. I'm perfectly capable of it, but it's always hard for me to say, no, I'm sorry, I can't come talk to your book club, or, I don't want to do that.
Is that how you were brought up?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And in a rural place, in small towns and country places, there's a sense to it. When someone asks you to do something, there's a reciprocity to it. Yeah, you should help them, and there's going to come a time when they'll return the favor. You know, when there's this thing we do when we take somebody a casserole, they always bring the dish back with a casserole in it. So that's just our tradition. And I think about that all the time with these thousands of requests I get. People ask me all the time to do things for them. Will you blurb my book? Will you talk to my club? Just amazing things that people want me to do for them. And I always think I could bake that casserole, but the dish is going to come back empty, if at all.
If it comes back at all.
If it comes back at all. This is not, it feels wrong to me to say no, so I have to recast it. This is a new situation. So it has gotten easier with practice, but it still will always feel wrong for me to disappoint people when they've asked something of me. But when someone is cruel or unkind, I don't hesitate to call them out. And I think I was always that kind of person. Once I got out of the oppression of childhood, I think in college, I created a new persona for myself. And she was very much like Angus in Demon Copperhead. I wore funny clothes. I love Angus. I do too. I had always been mocked for wearing the wrong clothes, for wearing hand-me-downs. Then I got to college where a lot of the girls wore, designer things, even like designer, not gowns. We're just talking like what you wear to play tennis. Just this whole new culture of clothing that I knew I was never going to understand or afford. So I went to the Army surplus store and bought, acquired this uniform. I got a pith helmet and this big green Army coat that came down to my feet because it was cold. And I got known on campus as the girl in the green pith helmet. And I just decided to make a statement of, I am not trying to look like you and I'm not trying to be you, and whoever wants to talk to me, they'll be my friends. And so a little bit of that in your face, you can't scare me with your contempt. I cultivated that. I got it. And I think have been that person ever since. I don't hesitate in my work to write things that will make people uncomfortable. I don't think about it. It's things that make me uncomfortable too. I go to the places where I think we all need to go and be a little uncomfortable and sort out, what we might be doing wrong, how we might be doing this better.
So I want to ask you, you are 68 now. How does it feel to be, at a point in life when women are meant to have shuffled off and be minding their own business, to be at the top of your game? There may be more game, there may be higher, but you've just won a Pulitzer. By the time this comes out, we'll know whether or not you've won the Women's Prize for the second time.
I don't want to win that one. That would be bad manners to win twice. Anyway.
I think you should stuff your Southern manners on that particular. I know you're not properly Southern, Midwestern manners. But how does that feel? How does that feel to be at this stage in your life and to be the best you've ever been, arguably?
It feels fantastic. I feel very lucky to be healthy, and especially to be lucky to be alive. It seems so obvious to me that a birthday is a victory. What's the alternative to being 68? It's being dead. So how great is this that I get another year to do what I love? And the great advantage that writers have over, let's say, athletes, fashion models, actors even, is that we trade in wisdom. We're not, thank God, selling our bodies or our strength or our, the elasticity of our skin. We're selling wisdom. And that only comes with age. It's exactly like scar tissue. You accrue it through your mistakes and your your bad falls and the way that they heal. So it feels really wonderful to get to be this age, this place, doing what I love so much and connecting with people in a way that 11-year-old Barbara never imagined in her wildest dreams.
Oh, it'd be amazing to be able to kind of time machine.
Oh, just to tell her, hang in there. It's going to get so much better.
It's going to get so amazing. So amazing. Can I just quickly ask you the questions that I always ask at the end?
Sure.
What's your emotional age?
I think it's 68.
I think it is too. You're in a good place, aren't you?
Yeah, and it took this long to get here.
Could you give us a book recommendation? So it could be a book that you've loved your whole life, or it could just be something great that you've read recently.
A book that was unusual for me to read and that I loved and I think everybody should read is The Ministry for the Future by Kim Stanley Robinson. Do you know his work? Do you know the book? I do, because my husband writes SF. Okay.
But if you don't like SF, you will not have considered it.
Not have considered it. And I'm not a science fiction reader, generally speaking. I love Ursula Le Guin. There are certainly, but generally speaking, I like literature that's literary and that's anchored in real things. And this book really is. And it's about climate change. It's set in the nearish future. I really recommend it. It's the first book I've read in years about climate change that left me feeling hopeful.
Oh.
Yeah, that's why you should read it.
Yeah. Wow, I'm going to hunt it down.
Okay.
What advice would you give younger women?
Please worry less about what other people think of you. They probably aren't thinking of you nearly as much as you are. Let it go.
How old were you, do you think, when you learned that yourself?
I've learned it a little better in a different way with each decade of life. And for exactly that reason, each decade of life has gotten better.
Brilliant. Is there an older woman who's inspired you or who inspires you now?
There are several. I didn't win the jackpot in the mothering department, but two women came into my life as mothers and meant everything to me. One was my literary agent, Frances Golden, whom I found right in the beginning. It was to her that I sent my first manuscript. I sent it because her entry, in the literary marketplace describing her agency was, "We do not represent any work that is sexist, racist, ageist, homophobic, or gratuitously violent. I realize this cuts me out of most of what's written, but I can be proud of all my authors."
What a woman.
That was her entry. And so I said, well, if there's an agent for me, she is it. So I sent her my manuscript. She loved it. She placed it. She fiercely protected me financially, ethically, morally, and even she just became my Jewish mother. She took such good care of me. She was the person after I had my first child, my marriage instantly fell apart. There was mental illness. There was, it was just like my life fell apart. I was sole supporter of a baby, trying to make a living as a writer, and thinking, there's no way I can get through this. And she called me every single night to help me know that I was crossing to a greener shore, that I was going to get through this, and that it was worth it to leave this bad marriage and make a life for myself, even if it was scary and hard financially. She was so there for me. When I was on book tour, when I would come to New York, she would bake lasagna and bring it to my hotel room. She made me believe in myself as a writer. And in the dark times, she made me remember that a lot of other people believed in me too.
Is she still your agent?
Well, she was until she died. We lost her during the pandemic. She was in her 90s, so she lived an amazingly good life, but it was a terrible loss. Yeah. And the other one was my mother-in-law. I hit the mother-in-law jackpot. Stephen's mother was also a mother to me, and we also lost her during the pandemic. But she was the person who, I could ask her for advice, and she would give me good, sound advice, without condescension. She would really think about it. We could just talk about anything.
She sounds amazing.
She was.
Everybody needs a Frances.
Everybody needs a Frances. Yeah. And the simplest way I have always put it is I didn't win the lottery in the mothering department, but then I did. It's a package, isn't it? You know, there are things. I have terrible ankles. I've broken both of my legs twice.
Oh my God.
Each of them twice. So I always say I'm a thoroughbred trying to live a Clydesdale life.
Yeah.
So I break easily. I have this, terrible hand thing, which is why I can't sign books anymore. But, I like the brain. So it's just like you get this package and you just embrace it.
Does your hand affect your writing?
Flat hand is fine. I can't grip like a pen or a stamp or anything like that. But I've had 6 surgeries on this hand to keep it functional.
Oh my
so flat hands are fine. And so, so typing is fine. Yeah, so I'm lucky. I mean, computer work, that matters. Signing books, I'm sorry, but that's not that important.
It's a nice to have. It's not
a need to have.
Yeah. What's your superpower?
Oh. Packing.
Yeah. Give me, it really is. I mean, you are here for 3 weeks. You have done, is this right, a week of back-to-back book events and interviews. You're about to go walking for a week.
I'm going hiking. I have hiking shoes.
Yeah, you've brought hiking shoes. Yeah. And then you've got the Women's Prize. So you've got like la-di-da events.
Yeah, la-di-da. Even like a formal gown. And it all fits in a carry-on, yeah.
How?
Yeah.
How have you done that?
Well, you start with shoes and you're really limited. You get 2 pair of shoes and you really have to think that through. You bring laundry detergent so you can wash things in the sink. And for presentable events, silk. It really compresses and it doesn't wrinkle. So yeah, there are tricks, but mainly you don't need as much as you think you do.
That's true. I couldn't believe it though when I saw you doing 3 weeks with a carry-on.
That's my rule. I have to fit everything in a carry-on because it's self-sufficiency. I want to be able to move through the world with nothing more than I can carry.
That's a good ethos. And I always feel uncomfortable asking this question.
And yet you do.
Yes, and yet I do, yes. So how many fucks do you give?
Half a dozen. I mean, there are days when I don't give one, but there are a lot of things I care about.
As evidenced by your fantastic book.
Thank you.
Thank you for letting me into your hotel room and coming on the shift. I'm so in awe, Barbara.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for doing what you do.
Oh, and I love Demons so much, and buy it. It's really, really good. You won't regret it, and buy it for a friend. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you for listening. You can hear a new episode of The Shift each Tuesday, wherever you get your podcasts. If you like what you hear, please do rate, review and follow, because it really does help other people find us. And if you'd like more of The Shift in your life, head over to theshiftwithsambaker.substack.com and sign up for weekly newsletters, podcast extras and more.